Through Fire and Water, the life of Reb Noson of Breslov, Chapter 12, Birth Pangs of Mashiach. The year Tav Kuf Samach Vav, 1805 to 1806, was one of the most intense in Reb Noson's life to date. He spent a great deal of time with the Rebbe, much of it transcribing the Rebbe's lessons and other works he had already written. After Sukkot, Esther Shendel gave birth to Reb Noson's second child, whom he called Meir. Reb Noson wanted to travel to Breslov to be with the Rebbe, but he remained at home until after the Bris Milah. When he came to the Rebbe told him that he should now begin writing down his original Torah ideas. The Rebbe then showed Reb Noson the Sefer HaNisraf for the first time, though he had already told him about it the previous Shavuos. The Rebbe read him a few chapters. Reb Noson said, "I was awed, but I didn't understand anything at all." Later that winter, Reb Noson transcribed part of the Sefer HaNisraf. Around Chanukah, Reb Noson stayed in Breslov for about 3 weeks. In this time, he finally finished transcribing the Alphabet book, the Sefer HaMidot, which he had first started in the summer of 1803. Reb Noson writes, "When I wrote the Alphabet book, the Rebbe would dictate from his notes and I would write. It took a long time to finish the work because when we first started, I wrote only about half a page. And after this, there was no opportunity to continue until 3 or 4 months later. Then I sat with him and wrote a little more. But after this, nothing was done for a period of about 2 years. Then before Chanukah, I stayed in Breslov for 3 weeks. Every day I would sit with him writing for several hours without a break until the work was finished, thank God. For the Rebbe, it was a very onerous task. But out of his love for the Jewish people, he would throw all of his energies into anything which stood to benefit the community as a whole. There was one occasion when I spent nearly the entire day writing at his dictation. Towards evening, he said, "Let's make a reckoning of what we've done today. We prayed, and we also learned a bit. And afterwards we wrote, and this is also learning because writing down Torah teachings counts as learning." Then he added, "Whatever I have to accomplish, I always want to finish it immediately without delay, never to leave it for another time. If it had been possible to complete the writing of the Alphabet book in a single day, I would have gladly done it." At the beginning of the following summer, the Rebbe gave the copy of the Sefer HaNisraf written by Reb Noson to Reb Yudel and Reb Shmuel Isaac, instructing them to travel from town to town in the Ukraine and to read a little in each place. He also told them to take sections of the manuscript copy of the lessons he had given publicly, which were subsequently printed in Likutei Moharan, and to leave a few pages in each town. After Pesach, Rebbe Nachman told Reb Noson that he had given him a great mitzvah by having him transcribe the Sefer HaNisraf. The Rebbe then said to Reb Noson, "Your book has begun to make an impact in the world." By this time, the Rebbe Nachman's baby son, Shlomo Ephraim, who had been born the previous year, was sick with tuberculosis. The Rebbe strongly urged Reb Noson to pray for the baby, saying, "I knew when I handed the book over to those two," meaning Reb Yudel and Reb Shmuel Isaac, "that they would brace themselves for an attack on this baby, they being the Sitra Achra, the forces of evil. At the time I gave it to them, I urged one of them to pray and beg for the baby's life." After Shavuos, Rebbe Nachman traveled to Mezhebish to the grave of the Baal Shem Tov to pray for his son and also for one of his followers, Reb Chaim Saras. Returning from the Baal Shem Tov's grave, the Rebbe said to Reb Chaim Saras, "I succeeded for you, but not for me." Shlomo Ephraim passed away before the Rebbe returned to Breslov. He was 1 year and 2 months old. The death of the child was a shattering blow for Rebbe Nachman, who had had the highest hopes for him. After the mourning period, Reb Noson and Reb Naftali visited the Rebbe. Reb Noson writes, "He told us the tremendous pain and suffering he was going through on every side, within himself and from the world outside. He was seriously ill and suffering intense physical pain. At the same time, he had to face unremitting persecution, all of it for no reason, because his opponents had fabricated everything they were accusing him of, and had made up things which had never even entered his mind. All this was in addition to all kinds of other agonies he was suffering, because the Rebbe was one who suffered constantly. As he was speaking, he said to us, "How can you understand what a tragedy the death of the child is for the world? My whole heart is broken and torn from its place." Tears began rolling down his cheeks. We felt so ashamed seeing him crying in front of us that we fled from him immediately. We felt as if the whole world had been destroyed. The following day was Friday. The Rebbe said that if we had not gone downstairs the day before, he would have told us something very beautiful. And that Friday, he gave a most wonderful Torah teaching. This teaching was that of the Garden of the Souls, which speaks about a field containing the most beautiful and pleasant trees and herbs. These are the holy souls that grow there, and about the master of the field, who tends the souls and the suffering he must endure in order to rectify them. This is in Likutei Moharan, Torah Samach Hey 65. This was the first time that Rebbe Nachman hinted at his role in rectifying souls, especially those that had already passed away. This was to play an important part in his eventual decision to move to Uman before his own passing in 1810. Rebbe Nachman said that Mashiach was originally due to come within a short period, and that he knew the year, month, and the exact day. However, now, because of his son's passing away, Mashiach would not come then. Reb Yudel had come to the Rebbe for the bris of Shlomo Ephraim with a new coat. Rebbe Nachman turned to him with joy and said, "With this coat you will receive Mashiach." But after the child passed away, the Rebbe said, "Mashiach will not come now for at least 100 years." Reb Yudel said, "But you told me that I'll receive Mashiach with this coat." The Rebbe answered, "That was what I said then. Now I say differently." One day that summer, Rebbe Nachman suddenly told Reb Noson and Reb Naftali to travel to Mezhebish, to the Baal Shem Tov's grave, and to stop in Berditchev on their way to visit Reb Levi Yitzchak. They arrived in Berditchev on a Friday and went directly to Reb Levi Yitzchak, who told them that it was a difficult time for him because the Shpala Zayda was in town. The two went from Reb Levi Yitzchak immediately for fear that he would tell them to leave town even before Shabbos. Reb Naftali suggested that they should indeed leave, but Reb Noson insisted that they should stay. He reasoned that if the Rebbe had sent them to the Berditchever at the same time that the Shpala Zayda was there, it must have been in order to prevent the Shpala from doing damage by slandering the Rebbe to Reb Levi Yitzchak, who thought very highly of the Rebbe. Just before Shabbos, Reb Noson and Reb Naftali came back to Reb Levi Yitzchak, who said, "You still here?" They answered, "How can we be in Berditchev and not spend Shabbos with you?" The Berditchever Rav loved Reb Noson and had great respect for him, and was really very happy to see him. After the Friday evening prayers, the people would wait in the shul to greet the Rav with Good Shabbos. As soon as he finished davening, he immediately looked for Reb Noson, saying, "Where's Nosala?" At the Shabbos meal, Reb Noson and Reb Naftali waited for the Shpala Zayda to be seated before choosing their own seats. One sat opposite the Zayda and the other next to him, so as to have the advantage should the Zayda attempt to slander the Rebbe. During the meal, the Berditchever Rav gave Reb Noson the honor of pouring the wine. With Reb Noson in full show, the Shpala Zayda was unable to defame Rebbe Nachman. So it was at all of the 3 Shabbos meals, and the day passed peacefully. On Sunday morning, the Shpala Zayda came to see Reb Levi Yitzchak and began slandering Rebbe Nachman. Among other things, he told him that because the Rebbe wanted his Chassidim to pray intensely, he permitted them to drink schnapps before davening. After the Shpala Zayda left, Reb Noson and Reb Naftali came to take leave of Reb Levi Yitzchak, who told them what the Shpala Zayda had said, although without revealing the source. Reb Naftali became very angry. Grabbing the Berditchever Rav by his lapels, he said, "Rebbe, you too? You also say this?" Reb Yitzchak understood that the charges were completely false. He said, No, I didn't say it. Someone else said it." After Reb Noson and Reb Naftali left Berditchev, Reb Yitzchak said to his followers, "I have never seen Chassidim who love their Rebbe as much as they do." As for the Zayda, when he returned to Shpala, he found the man waiting for him. He asked him where he was from. The man replied that he was from Nemrov. The Shpala Zayda said, In Nemirov, you have Magine Eretz, the guardians of the earth, referring to Reb Noson and Reb Naftali. On Sunday, the 5th of Av, July 19th, on the yahrzeit of the Arizal, Rebbe Nachman left for his annual summer trip to Medvedevka and Sharin. Reb Noson and Reb Naftali accompanied him for part of the way, together with the Rebbe's son-in-law Reb Yaska, Adel's husband, and 2 other followers from Teplik. In the coach, the Rebbe began talking about Russia and went on to reveal what was going to happen until Mashiach comes, and from then until Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection. The Rebbe spoke about this for about 2 hours. Rabbi Yaska was sitting next to the Rebbe, while 2 of his followers from Teplik were standing on the steps of the coach, one on each side, looking at the Rebbe. The Rebbe warned Reb Noson and Reb Naftali not to reveal any of what they had heard, saying, "I will testify that the others won't repeat a word." Later, Reb Noson wanted to review part of what the Rebbe had said with Rabbi Yaska, but it was clear that he had no idea what the Rebbe had been talking about. Rabbi Yaska said the only words he had heard were "a tree with leaves of gold." As for the 2 men from Teplik, they had not heard anything at all. Even Reb Noson forgot much of what the Rebbe had said, but he recorded everything he remembered in code. The manuscript was known as Megillas Sitarim, the Scroll of Secrets. After the Rebbe's return from his trip, Reb Noson told him of the joy they had experienced when he revealed these secrets, and the Rebbe replied that he too had felt great joy. Reb Noson writes, "I said to him, 'True, this is very good and most beautiful, but when is it going to be?' He replied, 'The very fact of having spoken about it is itself something very great. To have brought secrets that were hidden in the innermost recesses into a conversation in this world is itself something very great.'" In later years, Reb Noson did reveal a few of the secrets of the Megillas Asarim. He said Gog and Magog were not mentioned. This means that the war of Gog and Magog will not be a physical battle, but a war of ideology caused by the wave of atheism which will engulf the world. Reb Noson also quoted Rebbe Nachman as having said, "Mashiach will conquer the entire world without a single shot." During his trip to Medvedevka, Rebbe Nachman began telling his famous stories. He said to his followers, "My lessons and conversations with you are not having any effect in bringing you back to God, so I must now start telling stories." He then related the story of the lost princess. Reb Noson was not with him at the time, but on the Rebbe's return to Breslov, he repeated the story to him. As Reb Noson was later to write in his introduction to the first printed edition of the stories, the Rebbe's stories are for the most part completely new stories that have never before been told. The Rebbe created them based on the lofty perceptions he had gained through divine inspiration. He would clothe his perceptions within a particular story which itself expressed the awesome and lofty perceptions he had experienced, as well as what he saw in the place he had reached. The Rebbe said, "These stories are original and awesome. They contain deep hidden meanings. They are fit to be preached publicly, and one can get up in the shul and tell any one of them. One who has purified his heart and is expert in the sacred works, especially the Kabbalah, will be able to understand some of the allusions in the stories. They contain the most inspiring moral teachings and have the power to arouse the heart and draw one to God." The Rebbe also once said, "What can people find to complain about them? After all, they're nice stories." A few weeks later, on Rosh Hashanah, Taf Kuf Samach Zayin, September 13th, 1806, the Rebbe gave a lesson in which he explained the power of stories to arouse people. There are people who may appear to be serving God, yet God has no pleasure from their devotions. Even though they pray and study, they are asleep. They do not use their mind to the full of their potential. The Rebbe explained that the deeper people's spiritual sleep, the higher the level of Torah secrets needed to awaken them. But the only way to circumvent people's barriers and channel the intense light of the Torah to them without its overwhelming them is to garb the secrets of the Torah of Atika Stima, the ancient one, in story form. Such stories are called tales of ancient times. Tales of ancient times, Torah of the ancient one. All those who heard the Rebbe give the lesson were deeply stirred. when he said, "The blast of the shofar is a message. Wake up, you sleepers, from your slumber. Uru yeshenim mishenaschem." The entire assembly groaned and broke into weeping, forcing the Rebbe to pause for some time before he could continue the lesson. Afterwards, he remarked, "People say stories help you to go to sleep, but I say that stories can rouse people from their sleep." Reb Noson stayed in Breslov until after Yom Kippur, which was particularly eventful that year. On Kol Nidre night, during the prayers, a major fire broke out in Breslov and many houses burned down. There was a big tumult as people ran out of shul to save their families and whatever they could salvage from their homes. Later on, despite the fact that the fire had already been brought under control, the civil guard burst into the shul, beating people ruthlessly and forcing them to extinguish the fire completely. The following evening, the Rebbe said that he had wanted God to reveal the Torah to him that Yom Kippur, as he had once given it to Moshe in the wilderness. He had numerous arguments in favor of his endeavor, which, if they had been written down, would have filled many pages. "I had made a grand plan," the Rebbe said, "but because of that fire it was thwarted." The Rebbe later gave his followers to understand that because of what he had wanted to accomplish that Yom Kippur, a great accusation was raised against him on high, as a result of which he suffered the illness and pain that subsequently afflicted him. And this, he said, in spite of the fact that my whole intention was solely for the sake of heaven.